All right, welcome everybody. David, Bob, welcome back. And a
Hi,
special
mate.
welcome to Alfredo from Colombia.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, Alfredo.
How are you guys?
You're
Very
well.
well.
Yes, very well.
So in this episode of our Leadership Cafe, we want to talk about having a great boss. And Alfredo, you stepped forward. So
Okay.
how did that happen?
Well, I was speaking a couple of days ago with Bob, and we were speaking about lean, and then he told me about this conversation, and I told him, I have this experience with having a great boss. I'd like to talk with you guys. So here I am.
Awesome. And so how will we do this? You created, how did you call it? A boss map.
A boss map, yes, I did.
Is it something that we should share, or do you want to kick it off in a different way?
No, I can speak about it. It was just to make my thoughts clear,
Right.
I just wanted to know if he was really a great boss, or if it was just my imagination. So I made my boss map.
Here it is.
There it is. And I started my first experience having bosses was back in 1991.
Right.
And this map just shows the initials of all my bosses up to 2013 when I became my own boss. And well, I haven't had the time to grade my own bossing material.
Oh yeah, you're cutting the grass in front of me. I wanted to ask you how your current boss is doing.
So when you became your own boss, was that the best boss or the worst boss you ever had?
It's been all. Been all of those.
And how is it to manage yourself?
It's quite demanding. You have to step up your discipline and your commitment and your desire and your quest for knowledge, and you have to increase and step up all your attributes. Yeah, that's
true.
the thing. And
Was there a specific event or something that you decided to start your own company or become your own boss?
During this journey, and if you show the next slide, it's relatively similar. You can see that my journey was in a variety of companies, and the last company was a big company that had a very important transition. It was a local family-owned company, and then it was bought by private equity, and finally bought by a big multinational company. And I worked there for 17 years, and I was always happy. But at the end, I think things started to change for me. My expectations started to change. I had always had the seed of being entrepreneurial, but never had the opportunity. And finally, when the owners of this company just went out of the company because they sold it, one of those who was my great boss, he decided to start a construction company, invited me to join him. And so I said, okay, this is my chance. So I lived there, but it was in terms of economical success, it was not a good decision. And so I was just brought to a point where I had to decide what to do. So I had to think if I would try to get a job again, or now that I'm here swimming with the sharks, I should start swimming. So I was. It was more like a do or die situation, but that's the way I got into being my own boss.
And you already mentioned something that your great boss was your business partner as well, isn't it?
Yeah, for very, very short period of time.
Right. I think there's something to talk about there. So, so could you tell something about your experiences with a great boss? What was different from all the other bosses?
Well, I think first of all, I was fortunate of having good bosses in general. Just in my opinion, one really, really bad boss, but that's also educational, and a very, very good boss. And with this boss, which is in the slide is shown in green from 1998 to 2009. Well, I think I was very fortunate to be led by a very great boss for a long period of time. And why do I say this? Because I feel that this experience was transformational for me. I can say with being very certain, I was one person before and a different person afterwards. And this transformation has, in essence, one big issue. It made me better. I feel I was improved as a person. I increased my levels of confidence, my levels of knowledge. I had quite a lot of job experiences that were very fulfilling. I always felt I had a safety net. I never felt judged. I did feel, though, that it was not easy. It was very demanding on me, but I was always enjoying the trip. So basically, that was what made me think he was a great boss because I had very good bosses, but I never really had that type of feeling, that type of transformational feeling inside. So I think that's mainly the great issue for me.
Wow, sounds awesome.
And
Yeah.
did that great boss? So one of the things that sometimes happens to the great bosses is they get sidelined or demoted or pushed out or something like that. Did that great boss continue to prosper in their career, or did they suffer some downfall?
No, he was the big owner of the company,
Ah.
and at one time, the family began to have issues. I think that is a normal thing that sometimes happens within family-owned companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so they decided to sell the company, and that is why that company uh, uh, just became private equity owned and then just got sold to a multinational. And so he decided with his money to start a different business, and he got into construction. But I continued in the company for several years.
That's a very different. What was it? You said consumer packaging to construction.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah, he made quite a leap also, and
Yeah, so-
he still is in that business, and he's very successful though.
So on your chart, you showed you had. I was looking at the numbers. Something like 3 good bosses, 3 bad bosses, pretty even split overall.
I think most of them were in terms of time. Most of them were good because because perhaps if you add the number of bosses, it will go split. But in terms of time, basically it was like 4 years of bad bosses, and the rest were good experiences.
Yeah. Okay. But the split in terms of people was about 50-50.
Yeah.
Which you're doing remarkably well. For years in my lean leadership course, I would ask students who were normally aged 25 to 55, but generally they had at least more than 10 years of experience. But I would ask them, think of all the bosses that you've had in your career, and how many of them were good and how many of them were bad. The consistent answer over years that I asked this question, maybe 15 years, was they had 1 or 2 good bosses out of 10.
Wow.
And occasionally there was somebody like you who was about 50-50, or even better. You know, they got lucky. Their first 3 bosses were good bosses. But the unscientific poll that I did for more than a decade, it was always 10 or 20% were good bosses, and 80 or 90% were bad bosses. And it's not surprising given the prevalence of classical management and so on, but it's a depressing number as well, at least for the sample that I had, you know, here in America in the central Connecticut region.
Okay. Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah.
That's a terrible life experience.
Yeah. But as you said, the bad boss does result in some learning, and I'll share a story later with, you know, about my bad boss and good boss experience. There is learning from bad bosses, but if you have them consistently, you kind of get tired of what not to do. You know, tired of learning what not to do. At some point, you want to learn from a good boss of what to do, and it's not simply the antithesis.
No.
Yeah.
So what if you was talking with your students, Bob, about having a good boss or a bad boss, right?
Yeah.
The people that refer to a good boss, did they have similar stories or similar characteristics as Alfredo was referring to?
Yeah, definitely. And in the course, there's some slides that help provide some definition around this, of the different types of characteristics and so on, so they could, you know, have a frame of reference relative to the question. But
Right.
yeah, it was along the lines of what Alfredo said. Sure.
Yeah.
So Alfredo, in terms of you said you improved as a person, and it's how you felt inside when you were working with your great boss. What did that boss do differently to other people to give you that feeling? What practical feel? What was happening in your relationship?
First of all, I think he was interested in my success. And I first thought it was just like very nice of him. But besides that, I think there was a common interest in my success. If I succeed, then he will succeed, and that's okay. I mean, that's why I got the job, to get the job done well, and he was going to show me how to do that. So I think the first thing that happened is that he put the interest in my success and made the efforts for me to succeed, and was patient because I was young. I was young, and perhaps not not reckless, but not so mature. So I think he had the patience to show me the way. He never did anything for me. He asked me to do it. He told me very, very precisely when he was not satisfied, when he thought I was not doing the thing correctly. He trained me. He invested money in me, time and money. He showed me by example many times. At the beginning, I was very impatient because he used to take a lot of time thinking about ideas, and he asked me a lot. And I came to connect this with the 5Y tool many years afterwards. But he was not a lean person, but he would ask me a lot of times why I was going to do something. And I was very, very impatient because I just wanted to go and do it. and sometimes I just spoke for hours with him about doing something. And finally, I understood why I was going to do it or why I should not do it. So I think basically the most important trait I think is the interest and the patience and the involvement he put into making me successful.
So it's really kind of master and apprentice type relationship, like that Oyobun Kobun type Japanese thing.
Yes, indeed.
So, and if I got you right, then did you carry on working for the company when the PE house came and took over?
Yes.
And what changed? What was the dynamic? What difference did you notice?
everything changed with private equity. I remember with the family, I was even a board member eventually. I had a seat in some boards, and they listened carefully to what I had to say because I was now an experienced executive for them. And I've been working in sales and in supply chain, in manufacturing, in quality. I had a broad vision of the company, and so they thought, they felt it was important to listen to what I had to say. Suddenly, 2 or 3 months after this private equity process, they are not in the board. I even knew one of the board members, the new board members. He was a friend from school, but not even that made an impact. I just never went back to a board. They appointed a president, and the only thing he asked for was EBITDA. And he said, just fill in the blank here. And he showed me a board book, and I had to fill in the blank, and that was it. And they only asked about EBITDA.
So your job got so much easier.
Yeah, but so much boring.
No, so did private equity know anything about this business when they bought it? Or is it the usual, we don't know anything about this business, but we're private equity, and therefore we are smarter than anybody there who has been in that business, whether they're the shop floor or the CEO, doesn't matter. They don't know anything about it.
No, I think they were smart enough to just let us do our thing. They knew nothing about the business.
Yeah.
They knew they were going to be a 7-year owner, and so they just wanted to increase margins and have a good sale afterwards. So
increase the enterprise value and sell it.
Just get that organic growth. Yeah. So did your great boss stay on with the PE house as director or not, or did he left? Okay.
They all left. The family left, so there was no family members left, and we had a totally new board, and one of the let's say traditional executives was appointed as president, and the financial guy. So it became basically a financial company. Suddenly, it had, it was not all bad. During that period, I really had a good trip for a while because I had an idea that was just sitting there for years with the family. I said we had like 5 or 6 different manufacturing sites. So in my lean mind, there was a lot of muda, a lot of transportation, a lot of movement, and I had a dream. And I said, why don't we build a company just from scratch? And the family was never like very interested, but the private equity fund did, and they allowed us to do that project, and that factory today is working. So I had the opportunity to design, not only me, a very big team that I led, designed the new factory, and that was a good experience. But besides that, it was all finance.
Yeah. So the relationship changed in terms of the dynamic and the focus, but you still had a voice in some respects, even on the board. So did that company then go on to do very well under the PE's guidance? It
came to do very well, I guess, in terms of financial KPIs. Yeah. But from a cultural point of view, I think a lot of things were lost. The value of people.
What risk did that pose? Sorry? I'm hogging the conversation. What risk did that pose to the long-term sustainable performance of the business, do you think?
I think the most valuable asset, if you could call it like that, yeah, and I don't want to be like saying the common things everybody says, but I think it's always people.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of time and effort to make a person perform at its best. I mean, just listening to my own great boss story, it took 10 years to make me great. Well, in my own eyes, no?
Yeah.
And suddenly, in 1 or 2 years, the culture of the company changes, and I just don't want to be there anymore.
So you can affect rapid culture change then.
Always negatively.
2 years.
Very fast. And then I have seen, it's like the domino effect. I've seen a lot of people just quitting. They're not interested anymore.
Right.
Okay. That's the golden nugget, isn't it?
Yeah, because the financial objective is appealing to some, but not everybody.
Yeah, it needs purpose.
Yeah.
And all the relations change, right? I mean, I imagine you have this relation with your great boss, but I also assume that your great boss was also great to many other people in the company.
Yes, he was. He was. Everybody wanted to be with him. I think that's a nice symptom, no? When you have a boss that calls you and you say, "Yay!"
Yeah, you look forward to spending time with the boss as opposed to wanting to avoid the boss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everybody wanted to be with him.
Yeah, there was a supervisor in a group I was in, and the supervisor would get so upset when the boss was away from work the same day that the supervisor took a vacation day. So in other words, the supervisor always wanted to be away from work when the boss was at work, and take the vacation day when the boss was at work. And so it was like a wasted vacation day if the boss at the same time was not at work. Anyway, it was just the effort that people get into to avoid the boss in one way or another is quite remarkable when they're bad bosses.
Yes. So that again, that domino effect of people leaving. I mean, that's skills leaving, skills that have taken years of investment to build up, and the classic value, isn't it? It reminds me of, there was an article or an excerpt from a book that I got about mergers and acquisitions, and it said a lot of the time the people that come in as the new owners act in ways which drive out the talent that the business was valued on in the first place. That you decrease the value of losing people, and I think that's that we see quite a lot. So I've got one more question. I'm going to let the guys give it more. Did I get it right that you then went back to work with your boss, but in a different dynamic, a partner in a different business, production business?
Yeah.
So how did that pan out? Because if you were very much that Iobun, Kobun, master-servant relationship, that there was a dynamic that worked. Did the circumstance change that? Did you have the same relationship when you worked together after, or?
Yeah, it changed radically. After quite some years, when I decided to part my ways with the company, my great boss, we had conversations frequently, and I was telling him, I'm bored. I'm looking for things to do, and one day he said, okay, why don't you just come and work with me? Let's be partners in a construction project. It was a small construction project, and I said, okay, let's do this. I finally, I came to the point when I said, this is what I have to do. I have to change. I've been here for 17 years. It's been a nice ride. I've done all I could, and I've enjoyed it, but now it's time to go. And so I did. And things were radically opposite. My experience was not, despite being the great boss he had been, now he was not the great boss.
And had he actually changed, or had you changed, do you think?
We both did.
Okay.
Did. And circumstances did. I think circumstances play a role. As you said, in my first experience with him, I was an apprentice. I was interested in being taught, in being led. I was very young, but this second time around, I was experienced, and I thought I knew better. And he was older, and he was in the previous company. It was a family-owned business that had been around for 70 years. It was a third generation company, so there was a lot of money around. And now this was his small company with his money, and he was older, and he wanted to create a company that would serve his family, his sons, and he was not willing to teach me anything. He just wanted me to do as he said, and I was not willing to learn anything. I wanted to do things as I thought they should be done because I was the general manager. And so I think the conditions had changed. Our personal interests had changed. We were different people in life. And this basically, we both came to the conclusion that this was not a good idea. And so after a very, very short time, less than a year, we both decided we should not continue. And that's when I had to make my own decisions and what I had to do with my own life. So yes, people change and conditions change, and I think that is also an important issue that has to be taken into account when you grade a boss.
Mm. Yeah, one last thing then, and I will generally shut up then. One of the stories, like Bob would say, I never shut up, do I? What Bob was saying, he's got stories he's coming back to, and I've kind of been waiting to tell you this one because it just fits in so well. It's curious for me because I think I historically described the boss of mine, who was the supervisor in my toolmaking apprenticeship, as being a really bad boss, because I went home in tears at 19, 20 years old, really upset because this guy had slapped his hand in my face, was spitting at me with his rage, calling me all the names under the sun because I'd, gone 0.5 millimeter under on a diameter of a bit of tool steel or something and wasted a bit of metal. And I always qualified that as being a bad boss. And then years later, through a different lens, through a more experienced lens myself, realised I was quite a hot-headed teenager that thought he knew far too much and needed putting in his place. So in actual fact, I think that guy did me a lot of good by taking me down a peg and humbling me to a point that I learned something, whereas I probably wouldn't have learned if he hadn't been so aggressive. So I think you get to see people and life through different lenses, and your opinion can change what good and bad looks like. So that's where I get fascinated. How do we define good? How do you define what good boss is? And as you just said perfectly, it's circumstance dependent, it's age dependent, it's purpose dependent, and so many things come into it. But ultimately, regardless of things, it's the strength of the relationship with somebody that will lead to a high performance culture. And if you break relationships, the culture will change. I love confirming an awful lot of what I think. But that I am going to show you guys.
Yeah, it shows very much like in BTFA, you have these environmental dimensions, right?
Yeah.
And if these environmental dimensions change, everything changes, also the relations. And so what I was wondering, if it would be hypothesizing, but how would suppose your great boss wouldn't have left the company, they wouldn't have sold the company. How do you think your relation within that company would have developed over time? You'll becoming, let's say you had 10 more years in the same company, and what do you think would have happened? Would you have the same clash later on, or would that relation evolve differently? What do you think?
I think the relationship would have remained a very, very good apprentice, master teacher relationship, because that was the continuum, no? And he was always looking for ways to expand the company, and I was part of that project. So I was, in a sense, infinitely available for growth. To the last minute, and before he told me the company was for sale, I was in a new position. I was going to become the CEO for the company, and I think that relationship would have just kept that way and get deeper and deeper, and perhaps I would have never felt the necessity or the courage to leave. When I felt the courage to leave, maybe quite a lot of this feeling is because he called me. But if he was in the company, nobody was going to call me. So maybe I would be there still.
Do you know what that reminds? There's a thing called collusion that in psychologically that the Arbinger Institute really dug into, and they did a great a play, but a guy reading all the different parts. So they had to put on a female voice and things as well for a couple of different characters. And unfortunately, I mean, I've tried to share this with people, a number of times, and it's always that they pick up on. It's like, oh, that guy does a woman's voice that's really off-putting. It's like completely missing the point. There's some really rich material in there. But what they, one of the parts of that story was that this mum, had a teenage boy, and he was going out and he was coming back late, and she couldn't control him. And she put some boundaries and parameters on this relationship. Like, you're better, if you want to borrow the car, you've got to be back at 10:30, And if you're a minute late, you're never borrowing the car again. Typical stuff we also have to try and control teenagers, right? And so at 10:29, she heard the screech of the tyres and the back door open, and the car keys get thrown on the kitchen side, and he's like, "Mum, I'm home." And her response was, "Yeah, but you cut it close, didn't you?" And it's like, so, and where you get dynamic in relationships, people they feed off each other, particularly in marriage. We keep each other in a psychological state that suits our own purpose, conscious purpose. And so in that example, the mum was so used to the son being wrong that even when he was right, she had to find a way to twist it to put it, make him wrong again, And I think that principle of collusion, that we keep each other in the position that suits, but in a very, very deep unconscious fashion, is what you've just touched on there. It's if you're in a relationship with somebody, that relationship will fundamentally remain the same if you stay together for 50 years or 60 years. You'll never really break. And if people do really have a paradigm shift within themselves, often the relationship breaks down.
Yeah, I agree a lot with that. I think that's what happened to me, because besides my great boss story, I think my really, really, really great boss has been being alone. Life is such a good boss. I've been on a journey since 2013 that's been very educational and very transformational, and I'm not the person that I was when I was working at that company. So now I know that if I would have remained there, I would probably still be perhaps for life.
You're apprentice for life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I stepped out on my own as well, and that purposely to learn, because I had imposter syndrome. I couldn't really be a consultant telling other people how the business never really started. Was my principle, so I went and started up a couple of businesses and learned a lot by some successes and some failures. But it does teach you a lot being on your own. But I've got to say, I've stepped up. I work for and my boss in my practice is brilliant. Probably next to a guy called Eric, probably the best boss I've ever had. We've got a fantastic, and he's doing a lot of the things for me that you said. He's given me those opportunities to slowly distance myself from that need for independence, with that one-man band entrepreneurial mind, and learn how the big corporate engine works.
Mm.
So I've not been in it for a few years, and things have moved on. And it's a professional services environment. So and he's great, absolutely fantastic. So it can cut both ways. I mean, you can get really good bosses in all environments, but it is when they're on your side, helping you, making sure you feel safe, giving you the opportunity to experiment, to learn, to progress. And that links into something we've spoken about on the other sessions, with the motivation model, of to learn, bond, acquire, and defend. If you're ticking those 4 boxes in life, then you feel like you're okay. So yeah, it's great. So I'm thinking that's my 2 pennyworth. I've had a good boss and a bad boss in this now.
Well, indeed. I wanted to pick up on something Alfredo said about the boss that he had. And same with you, David. We've all had a boss that knocked us down a peg, and that in retrospect it was probably when we were young, hopefully, and but many people don't have that experience. They have it later on, unfortunately. But when you're young, if you get knocked down a peg and so forth, in hindsight, you can you can understand that, even though the boss might have been a bad one, but there's certain events or situations where it proved to be helpful. Again, there's a lot to learn from those bad bosses, but focusing on the good bosses, one thing Alfredo said was he gave me when he gave me feedback, it was very specific. You said something like that, Alfredo. It was very specific feedback. It wasn't just this general sense of, I don't like what you're doing, or I don't like your attitude, or I don't like your work. It was something very specific, and I have experienced. I've got it somewhere documented, my bosses and who was the best ones, but it was the 1 in 10 or 2 in 10 kind of thing for me as well. And the best boss was actually one in manufacturing. I had been in engineering for a number of years. And in the engineering world, the focus is more the technical type of work, and really not such a good people focus. But when you go to manufacturing, that's a different world. And you have to interact with a lot of different people across a lot of different functions in close proximity. The purchasing person is not in some building far away. They're right next to you in your work area or whatever. And so just the boss that I had in manufacturing was the best boss that I ever had. Just pretty much everything Alfredo said. He developed you, he had confidence in you, he provided guidance, gave you challenges, the specific feedback. It was very different, remarkably different than the engineering bosses that I had, where they moved you around like chess pieces, do what you're told. They gave you very little guidance. You basically had to watch how other people succeeded and how other people got in trouble, and they were your guide because the boss didn't give you any guide. Expectations were unclear. I remember in engineering one time asking a boss, I'd like to know what's expected of me, and the boss said, how do I know? I don't know what's expected of me. And so it was just a confusing situation and confusing world to be in. But this manufacturing boss was great, and it was a really good time in my career at that age to come across a boss like that, because for the prior I don't know, 10 years or so, whatever it works out to be, it was basically lousy bosses, some worse than others. I can share a few slides if you like of some of the sort of boundary conditions, or some of the that we talked about in class with my students about the good bosses and the bad bosses. Let me see here. We'll get the share screen going here. Let's see, that's not the screen I want to share. Let's see. Oh, excuse me, application window. Sorry. Got it. Here we go. Can you see this slide of toxic bosses?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's I'm sorry?
Can you make it full screen?
Oh, yes. There we go. Yeah, so what we have at the top are a couple of legendary bosses, Al Dunlap and Linda Wachner. Mr. Dunlap recently passed away, but these were legendary bosses in terms of being bad bosses. But to the point where they're toxic bosses, and we've probably all experienced on the left-hand side in red the type of bosses that are abusive and manipulative and bullying bosses and getting publicly humiliated, and kind of boss who can never admit they were wrong and blames others and so forth. And this kind of stuff's a lot more common than anybody wants. You know, nobody really asks for these kinds of behaviors from bosses. In the lean parlance, there's no pull for these bad behaviors. And what's interesting about these kind of behaviors, as I note down here, these things are subject to interpretation, and you don't have to be these kind of extreme examples like the two shown in the upper right in terms of the bad behaviors. These things can operate at a much reduced level and still be quite destructive to the organization. And then, of course, you have the inconsistencies between what the bosses say and what they end up doing that cause people a lot of confusion and consternation and just cognitive dissonance and so forth, and it just makes life at work much more difficult. And I always was amazed, and we would talk about this in class, how leaders accept all kinds of behavioral waste. The bosses are quick to tell us something or other is unacceptable. They'll just, you know, have no problem telling us immediately something or other is unacceptable. But then you see all these other things going on in an organization: the blame, the organizational politics, the metrics that drive the wrong behaviors, the indecision, the discrimination with the glass ceiling, the bureaucracy, and so forth. It's all waste. None of this adds any value. You know, there's no pull for this kind of stuff in an organization. And so the final slide here is just contrasting what the previous two slides were with the kind of boss that when we think of the best boss we had, they were like this. They were humble, and they were calm, patient, trusting. They listened well. They were honest. They were objective. They would observe. You know, all these kinds of things and more. And the connection that I like to make here in class and to this happens to actually be some training slides, not from class, but from leadership training slides. But these kinds of behaviors improve the information flow. So when you have a bad boss, it's somebody you want to avoid. You don't want to tell them what's going on. You self-censor. You block the information. The information doesn't flow. But when you have a good boss, a boss you know who's not going to go crazy when a problem arises, and not going to immediately blame you, but is going to be calm and listen, and it may even approach problems from the perspective of some humor, that this is a kind of boss that you want to go interact with and engage with and talk about problems, opportunities, experiences, and so on. And it's just, it improves the information flow, and therefore people at all levels know what's going on in the company. You don't have all these surprises. Things don't blow up as often into a big calamity and so on. And so there really is there's a solid business reason for having these kinds of, having leaders who have these kinds of value-added behaviors, and solid business reasons for eliminating these kinds of toxic bosses who block the flow of information and create a horrible work environment. Either of you want to talk to any of these slides or any points in these slides?
Yeah, do you know what? The thought that occurs to me there, Bob, is that our bosses are people too. And quite often, if you think of BCFA, you know, the actions, the habits, the output that we see from people is what's going on internally for them, their fears, their feelings, their emotions, their thinking patterns, and premised on their fundamental beliefs, their imprinted worldview. So I think it's, that behaviour that you see is a reflection of what they're going through sometimes as well, and that links to your point about, I think we mentioned it before, the phrase I use is target-driven behaviours. You know, how people are responding to the pressure that comes from the judgment mechanism, which is the KPIs they're subject. And that can be the new CEO reporting to the private equity house, or it can be anybody at any level, and that all affects the culture of the business because of the amount of fear that's present in terms of having to perform to be safe,
Right.
job, to save your reputation, whatever it might be. So it's for me, that's where it's interesting to talk from a BTFA point of view, because if we can challenge some of that, then we can challenge some of those KPIs and look at how are we consciously developing KPIs through inclusion to get people to buy in, to get and tick all those psychological boxes so that it does work rather than so it doesn't,
But I also think it's the responsibility of the boss. If you're in a boss position, you just don't flow through all the crap that comes from above to your people.
No.
I mean, when I became a supervisor and on up the ladder, one of the things I determined I was going to do is just shield people from all the bullshit, and just not be the kind of boss that behaves in a way that reflects the pressure that they're under.
Right.
I wanted to be the kind of boss that behaves in a way that people want to interact with somebody in a hierarchy, which is not an ideal type of environment, but that's the way it is in the workplace.
Yeah.
But you want to be the kind of boss that can relate to people, that can work with them to understand problems and improve the situation and so on. And let's face it, you as a boss, you got more responsibility, you're making more money and so forth. You shouldn't just act like your various intelligences should improve, not devolve the higher up you go. But in most cases, they seem to devolve, and you get these bosses at the top, throwing stuff across the office, throwing stuff at people, having tantrums, going nuts. It's like, what is this? But the system allows these kinds of people, which are basically mild or strong forms of sociopaths, not all, of course, but many of them, to get promoted up through the system, because the vision of somebody who is effective is somebody who treats people poorly.
You know what?
There's a clue in Alfredo's story and your slide. Can you put up the slide again, Bob?
Yep. Okay.
So,
application window. Yes. Which one?
this one.
No, I can't see it yet.
I need
Here it comes.
Right. All right, here it is.
Okay.
So what I noticed is that here, right, and I think that's in your story, Bob, that you said something like you want a good boss to shield the people below them from all kinds of
Bullshit.
messages from above. You said bullshit, right? I want to keep it nice, but I think that's what you see here, right? I mean, what kind of personality are you building when you say something and do something else, right? That creates a conflict in the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think I heard in Alfredo's story is that the interest of Alfredo and the interest of his boss were aligned.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no need for shielding, because
Right.
everything is aligned. And I think that comes back to what David and I have been talking about a lot. That if you don't have the objectives aligned, which is very much at the root of Hoshinkanri, then you get all these kinds of conflicts.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think really aligning the objectives of each other, that's at the root of building good relations.
Yeah, that's
And it's a terrible environment to live in, but when I faced it, it was I made the judgment that I was going to shield people from the nonsense. I'd rather not do that, of course,
Exactly.
right?
Mm.
Yeah.
But see, there's another dynamic to that, isn't there, where sometimes the boss is not aware of the target-driven behaviours, i.e. the targets, because those targets reside in themselves, and it's them that are pushing for more, and so then that's when it becomes really difficult to practice Hansai and Kaizen and reflection in terms of personal improvement, because it's very hard for any of us, I mean human beings in general, to look at ourselves, genuinely in the mirror and see our own the effect we're having on other people around us. So if we're that driven boss, if we're the one who's got to get that email out, I'm thinking of a guy that I worked with, managing director of his own company, SME, and you know, you go up to him and go, oh, right, hey, I've got this opportunity and we're going to do, and he would engage with you, you know, like, oh yeah, okay, this is great, yeah, and then you'd see him doing this, like, and before you'd finish your sentence, he was typing his next email again, and he wasn't even listening to you, and it was like, so disrespectful, you know. But that came from within him because he was driven to do what he wanted, you know.
Well,
so sometimes,
yeah.
That's the hardest thing to break.
Well,
Targeted behaviours from within the leader.
David, to your point, what you see in this slide is the result of a lack of reflection or a lack of hindsight, and plus the acceptance of these things, the blame, the organizational politics, and so forth, which is tied into the preconceptions that this picture, this image of the things that are the bullet points that are listed here is, well, that's just the way it is in business.
Yeah.
And when you show a slide like this, people say, well, that's not that, it doesn't fit the preconception of what business leadership in business should be like. You know,
no, absolutely.
The preconception is you should be hard on people, you need to drive people, you need to yell at them and belittle them to get them to perform. You know, it's a theory X or whatever.
Impose control, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, impose control.
I got my opinion on this one.
Right.
Two things. The first one, as David said, bosses are people, and people act according to certain issues, for example, fear. And I have come to understand that bosses feel fear to lose the job, for example. And they also are victim of circumstance. The company is the circumstance, and the company wants financial performance, and they are victims of what they have learned from their own bosses in the past.
Yeah.
And we for one reason or another, we come to resemble our previous boss experiences. So perhaps this combination of situations, interests, experiences with previous bosses, performance, and fear makes bosses act like this. And only if, when the time comes and you are the boss and you have the awareness and you have the bravery to say, I'm aware I have to comply with all this, but I can do it a different way. So then you do it. Otherwise, you just follow the path. No, you just do the same that has been done for decades.
Take the easy road, not the high road. Yeah.
But the thing that the leaders have a difficult time understanding is the effect that these behaviors have on the organization, not just in people, but again, getting back to this information flow thing. Bosses hate surprises, and they usually get surprises because information doesn't flow. Most of these disasters that you see in business, like the Boeing 737 and all kinds of the Vail mining disaster and all kinds of things, happen because information flow is blocked. Nobody wants to give the boss bad news. Why? Because the boss behaves in a way that chop your head off if you give them bad news and so forth. And so this is an illness in the company when you have blocked information flow. You have a chronic illness. It's like high blood pressure, and over time it increases. The what's it called? The mortality rate, or the possibility. It raises the chances that the company will face some serious, expensive, big, huge problem that'll cause layoffs and all kinds of negative things to occur. So this information flow connection between that and how people behave, but deeper than that is how people think, what they believe in, and their preconceptions, is critical to the effective running of an organization. But this is just not where people are at. I mean, these are things that I'd written about in 22 years ago, that these connections are still not being made.
Yeah, so I'm going to exercise my own biases and preconceived assumptions about life now, because I think I like what you said, Alfredo. There's a saying in psychology that said we're all victims of victims. Because of our mirror neurons, we reflect other people, and that's how we learn quite a lot. So we're bound to reflect the people that we've been exposed to in certain ways. Parents most predominantly, or significant carers, people that bring us up, bosses as well. So the way that we can break that, really, I think, is education. So the only way we can educate for people to start having a broader conversation, comes back to my key point all the time, which is language. If we can introduce a simple language, it doesn't scare people off, hence the BTFA model, and we can just get leadership teams talking about what people believe, think, feel, and before they act, so that we can start to consider some of these things in a simple way. We can perhaps break that cycle, or at least start chipping away at it. And there was another point there as well that, you know, you kind of hit the nail on the head again, Alfredo. You said fear and purpose. You know, these are within the conversation. Those are the two strong themes that come out. And in our previous conversations, especially from Emil's point of view, we've been pushing the idea of followership quite a lot. And I wonder, rather than thinking of this in terms of antagonistic, we've got to fight against the bosses and have a revolution from a followership point of view, we think about, you know, how can we educate followers to find the opportunities to create the higher level relationships by being the friend of the boss, by finding the common ground and doing the things that the bosses aren't doing. You know, maybe that's there's something there to be explored as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there is. I did in my experience that finding the common ground with the bad boss was I didn't succeed with that. They're so deep in their preconceptions. I mean, most, you know, when I was starting out in the business world, my bosses already, you know, these people had 30 years of experience, and so the common ground was me to them, me coming to them, not them coming to a different way of a different way of thinking about things.
All right, it's almost an hour now. I see Alfredo has to go to a next meeting, so I propose that, Alfredo, we give you the last words before we say goodbye. And what did you take out? I mean, the last 20 minutes we have been talking quite a bit. Is there something that you take out of it that you think, hey, that's interesting for me to reflect on further?
No, I guess the issue on education, awareness, may perhaps people being more critical as a good thing, not as a bad thing. Those are the basic philosophical aspects of Lean. No, you have to be critical. You have to be compassionate.
Yeah, challenge, respect.
Yeah, challenge, respect. Those are not antagonic. They go together, and they make you better.
Yeah, your story makes that very clear.
Yeah, and absolutely.
For having me today, I really have to go. I would love to stay, but I enjoyed a lot the conversation. Thanks a lot, Bob, David, Emil, for having me today.
Thank you for sharing.
Pleasure, absolutely. Fantastic to see you. Cheers, Alfredo.
All right.
Okay.
All right, signing
off.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
So that last point there before Alfredo had to leave us, I think is fascinating. We're if we've got a couple more minutes, and we're not going to close the show just yet. I know a lot of the time, don't you think that like this whole kind of vision and mission statement stuff is really like just meaningless and does nothing for anybody because it's done in isolation in a boardroom. But when you've genuinely got a shared purpose, when you're genuinely trying to create something together, when you've got a dream, let's go back to the language you used and highlight that Toyota and Honda use purposefully. It's about dreaming, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And if you've got a shared dream, if you've got a shared ambition, a shared purpose, whatever word you want to use to say there's a self-serving goal in your head you share with somebody else, and you have got a passion to move towards that, then that's when you get genuine friendships and high-level relationships, and that in a working environment. You know, and I feel that's what we've got between us. You know, we've done a bit of work together. Emil, Bob, we haven't, but I mean, we're completely on the same page, which is why we just bounce off each other all the time. Mm-hmm. When you get that in a commercial, revenue-generating environment, it's you know, like sprinkling miracle dust on what gets done. Yep. So it's you know,
everything gets done faster, better. You're more responsive to changes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that whole kind of, you know, the why Google called the Aristotle study what they did. It was because it's that recognition that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and you're talking about human relations. You know, it's it's fascinating.
What you mentioned, David, is that for these human relations to be able to build up, to form it themselves, you need this common challenge or this common purpose together. You need this shared dreams somehow. I mean, if in Alfredo's story, you saw that the dream became EBITDA became the dream.
Mm.
But that's a dream for a very elite group of people. All the other people don't have an interest in EBITDA.
Because where's the benefit? Yeah.
There's the benefit for the followers, right? So,
Mm.
so if you don't have something that stirs the emotions in a positive way of the people that are supposed to contribute, people will not contribute on one side, and on the other side, if you don't, what's the value of a relation if it's only the money, right? I mean, if you try to build a relation because you have a purpose to fulfill, then it's obvious, and if this purpose is big enough, it's obvious that you cannot do it on your own. So then there is also this need to build these relationships.
Mm.
And if EBITDA is the goal, what's the need for the relation?
Yeah. And again, going back to Lawrence and Noria's book, Driven, that 4-point motivation compass to learn to bond, defend, and acquire. You know, the EBITDA bit is just purely about acquire. Somebody's fan on their computer is getting very noisy.
It's not here.
Could
I
be mine.
It might be right.
It might be my computer. This is how it starts to die when the fan starts to rev up, and probably by the end of the summer, this computer will be dead. I've made preparation, though. I'm well back.
Contingency plan.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
But that's yeah. So
Well,
I mean, again, there's no single answer. Thinking about what we can say to wrap it up. It's about purpose. It's about relationships. It's about intent. It's doing what's best for others.
Well,
It's that
I think the good news is there's good bosses out there. The bad news is there's not enough of them. And hence, getting back to David, as you said, Emil's point is, as followers, how can we make better choices in who we follow and so forth, or do we just hope for getting luck, and having the occasional 1 or 2 good bosses out of the 10 or 20 or 30 bosses we have in our career. So
yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I think that let's leave it on a positive. The more technology gives us the capacity to look inside people's heads and understand more about how human beings work, the easier it's going to become for people to understand what's actually going on in themselves, so we can raise self-awareness, which includes bosses and followers. And I think technology presents a really good opportunity if people will just engage with the language, which is why we've got to start simple so they do and not alienate them to begin with. There's huge potential to do better as a human race going forward.
there is.
Let's just keep banging the drum. Let's just keep banging the drum.
We will. All right.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks for joining again.
Yep.
Cheers, mate. Yeah, see you soon.
Good
See you
time.
next
See you
time.
soon. Yep.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.